My brother-in-law's truck was in my parents' driveway. That's the first thing I saw when I turned off the highway onto their road. That black pickup, parked sideways like he owned the place. Which, apparently, was exactly what he thought. I should back up. 3 years ago, my parents were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Barrie, Ontario, about 90 minutes north of Toronto. My dad had just retired from 31 years driving for a regional freight company. My mom had worked part-time at a pharmacy counter for most of my childhood and stopped when her knees got bad. They weren't struggling exactly, but they weren't comfortable either. Their lease was going up. The building was being converted to condos. They had a few months to figure out what came next. I'm the younger daughter. I'm 31. I work in procurement for a manufacturing company, and for the past 4 years I've been extremely boring with my money. No car payment, tiny apartment, packed lunch every single day. I have a work friend who calls me aggressively frugal and means it as a compliment, so I take it as one. My older sister is 5 years ahead of me. She married her husband about 7 years ago, right around when I was finishing my undergraduate degree. He works in sales, switches companies every 18 months, talks about money constantly, in a way that makes it clear he never quite has enough of it. My sister is not a bad person. That's the part that's actually the hardest to explain. She loves our parents. She just loves what's convenient for her a little more. The idea came to me slowly and then all at once, the way most things do. I started running numbers in October of that year. I had savings. Real savings, not just an emergency fund. I had been quietly maxing my TFSA and RRSP for years, and I had a non-registered account on top of that. I talked to a financial advisor I trusted. I talked to a real estate lawyer. I talked to a mortgage broker even though I ended up not needing one. By the following spring I had purchased a piece of property about 20 minutes east of Penetanguishene, on a small lake called Bass Narrows. Not a famous lake, not a resort lake, just a quiet lake with a gravel road running along one side, and spruce trees growing close to the water. The lot was just under an acre, and it had a crumbling shed and a lot of promise. I spent the next 14 months building a house on that property. I didn't build it with my hands, obviously. I hired a general contractor, a woman named someone I'll just call my builder, who had done 15 years of residential construction in Simcoe County, and knew exactly what she was doing. I did make approximately 400 decisions that year, about insulation and window placement, and whether to do a steel roof or asphalt. I went with steel. It costs more up front, but it lasts. Final cost, including the land, the build, the dock, the appliances, and the first load of firewood. $342,000. Every cent of it mine. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what comes later. I told my parents I was taking them on a drive for their anniversary. They've been married 43 years. My dad laughed and said he hoped it involved lunch. My mom asked if she needed to dress up. I said no. Just comfortable shoes. It was a Saturday in June, the kind of day Ontario occasionally produces that makes you forgive it for every February it has ever put you through. Clear sky, warm without being heavy, the smell of cut grass and lake water, mixing together in that specific way that only happens in the Shield country. I drove them up the highway and then onto the county road and then onto the gravel, and my mom said, "Where are we going?" And I said, "Almost there," which is a thing I'd been saying for about 14 months. When the house came into view through the trees, the cedar siding, the big windows facing the water, the dock running out over the lake, my mom put both hands over her mouth. My dad said nothing. He just looked. I said, "Happy anniversary." It took a few seconds for them to understand. My mom kept saying, "But whose is? Whose?" And I said, "Yours. It's yours." And my dad turned to look at me, and he had that expression he gets sometimes, the one he never has words for, and I had to look away for a second because I was not going to cry in the driveway. We went inside. I'd stocked the kitchen. Milk, eggs, bread, coffee they actually like. Good maple syrup from a farm stand on the way up. I'd put fresh towels in the bathroom and a split of firewood on the porch and a card on the kitchen table that said, in very small writing, everything I had not been able to say out loud. My dad stood at the railing on the back deck for a long time, looking at the water. My mom sat on the new couch and kept touching the armrest like she was checking that it was real. I did not tell my sister. I know how that sounds. But I want you to understand something about the dynamic I grew up in. My sister has always been the one who knows about things. Who gets included. Who my parents call first with news, good or bad. Because she's older, and that's just how it settled. And that meant she also had opinions about everything. About where my parents should live. About what they should spend money on. About what made sense for the family. I was not interested in her opinion on this. I had done this myself. I had planned it myself. I had paid for it myself. And I wanted just once to do something without it becoming a committee decision. So I kept quiet. My parents knew, obviously. I asked them not to say anything until we'd had a chance to do the legal paperwork, which my lawyer had advised anyway. They agreed. My mom looked slightly nervous about it, which I should have paid more attention to. The legal structure, since several people have asked about this, the property is held in a trust. My parents are the beneficiaries and have the right to live there for the rest of their lives. I am the trustee. The terms are registered and on file. Nobody can sell it, rent it, or borrow against it without my authorization. The property taxes are set up on pre-authorized withdrawal from an account I fund. My lawyer set it up this way specifically because of situations exactly like the one I am about to describe. I want to say that again. My lawyer set it up this way specifically, exactly like the one I am about to describe. I found out my brother-in-law had been to the property 3 weeks before I arrived. My parents had apparently mentioned it to my sister. Not the whole story, just that I had done something nice, and they were spending more time up north. My brother-in-law, who has worked in real estate sales at 2 different points in his career, and considers himself an expert, started asking questions. He drove up one weekend to have a look. He walked around the property. He pulled comparables on his phone. He started talking about rental income potential, about what the waterfront market was doing, about how property like this was an asset the whole family should be thinking about. My parents said they didn't think it worked like that. He said he was pretty sure it did. I found this out the Thursday before the long weekend in August. My mom called me, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's trying to sound casual about something that is not casual. She said my brother-in-law had mentioned something about getting the family together at the lake house, and she wasn't sure what to say to him. I asked her what she meant. She said she thought maybe he had some ideas about the property. I asked her what kind of ideas. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, he mentioned something about listing it for the September long weekend, just a trial. I said listing it. She said, he said waterfront rentals up there are doing very well. I sat with that for a few seconds. Then I called my lawyer. She was not surprised. She told me the structure we had set up was solid, but she recommended I have the full trust documentation with me when I went to the property, along with a clear summary of the terms. She also recommended I not call my brother-in-law directly. Let the documents do the talking, she said. People like that need to see paper. I drove up on the Saturday of the long weekend. I did not tell anyone I was coming. I had a folder in the passenger seat with every document my lawyer had prepared. The trust deed, the beneficiary designation, the trustee authorization, the property tax records, a 1-page summary my lawyer had written in plain language, specifically for situations where someone needed it, explained clearly and quickly. My brother-in-law's truck was in the driveway. My sister's car was behind it. There were Muskoka chairs on the dock that I had not put there. Someone had brought a small propane fire table onto the back deck. There was a cooler by the back door with a brand name sticker on it that I recognized as my brother-in-law's. I sat in my car for about 45 seconds. Not because I was nervous. Because I wanted to be very calm when I walked in. My dad was in the living room. He stood up when I came in, and his expression told me everything before he said a word. He looked relieved to see me and worried about what was coming at the same time. He said my name and then stopped. His hands were doing that thing they do when he's stressed. The slight tremor that started a few years ago, and mostly isn't noticeable but gets worse when he's anxious. My mom was in the kitchen. She came to hug me and held on for a second longer than usual. My sister came down from upstairs. She looked startled to see me, and then she smiled in that particular way of hers, the one that tries to look relaxed but isn't. She said, "Oh, we thought you weren't coming up this weekend." I said I had changed my plans. My brother-in-law came in from the back deck. He's the kind of person who enters a room in a way that suggests he's been waiting for someone to notice him. He looked at me and did a half nod, the way he does, and said, "Hey, good timing. I actually wanted to talk to you." I said, "Okay." He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. He had a confidence that I recognized as the kind that comes from not yet understanding the situation. He said he had been doing some research on the property, and he thought there was a real opportunity here. Waterfront on Bass Narrows, he said. Could list for upward of $300 a night in peak season. He'd already spoken to a property management company out of Midland. They had a 60-40 split, he said, in favor of the owner, and with the right setup, the place could generate meaningful income for the family. I said, "For the family?" He said, "Yes, for everyone." He said it made sense to treat this as a shared asset. He said, and I want to remember this exactly, he said, "Your parents are getting older. This is the kind of thing families manage together." He pointed at my dad when he said it. My dad's jaw tightened. My sister was looking at the window. I said, "Can I ask you something? When you say shared asset, what do you mean by that?" He said he meant the family property. I said, "Whose family property?" He said, "I mean, it's in your parents' names, so." I put my folder on the table. He looked at it. I said, "This property is not in my parents' names." I said it the same way I would say any other factual statement. It's held in a discretionary trust. My parents are named beneficiaries with lifetime residency rights. I am the sole trustee. The terms of the trust prohibit any rental, sale, or encumbrance without trustee authorization, which is me. The property cannot be listed on any platform by anyone without my written approval. I slid the summary page across the table. He looked at it. He picked it up. His expression did a thing I had not seen it do before, which was go completely still. My sister said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means the property management company in Midland will need to be contacted and told to remove whatever listing he's already submitted." My sister looked at her husband. "Did you already submit a listing?" He said he had submitted an inquiry, that it wasn't final. I said, "It needs to be withdrawn today." I said it the way my lawyer had told me to say it, not as a request. "I have the trust deed here if you'd like to see the full terms, but the summary is accurate. Any listing without trustee authorization creates a legal liability." He looked at the page for another long moment. Then he put it down. He said, and this is almost funny, looking back, he said, "I was just trying to help." Nobody said anything. My mom made tea. I don't know why that detail sticks with me, but it does. She just quietly filled the kettle and turned it on, like making tea was the appropriate response to the situation, and maybe it was. My dad sat down in the chair by the window. My brother-in-law spent about 15 minutes on his phone, and I assume he was withdrawing whatever he had submitted to the property management company, and then he picked up his cooler, and he and my sister left before dinner. My sister texted me that night. The text said she hadn't known about the listing, and that she didn't think he understood the legal situation. I wrote back one sentence, now he does. We didn't speak for about 6 weeks after that. We've spoken since. It's different now. The way things get different when something underneath them has been made visible. But we manage. My parents stayed at the lake for the rest of that weekend, and the one after that, and the one after that. By September, my dad had a routine. He wakes up early and makes coffee and sits on the back deck before my mom is up, and he watches the light come across the water while the loons do whatever loons do in the early morning. He told me once, in the particular way my dad tells me things, which is very briefly and without looking directly at me, that he hadn't felt this settled in years. A few things I want to say, because I know people will have questions. The reason I structured it as a trust, rather than putting it in my parents' names outright. My lawyer strongly recommended against a direct transfer for several reasons. If my parents owned it outright, it could be subject to probate and estate challenges after they're gone. It would become part of their estate, which could create exactly the kind of conflict you've just read about, except with less of a clean answer. The trust means the property has a defined purpose, a home for my parents during their lifetimes, and a defined outcome after. My parents understand this. They also understand it means the property cannot be leveraged, or pressured, or rented out by anyone who has opinions about what they deserve. The reason I didn't tell my sister from the beginning, I've thought about this a lot. I don't think it was wrong. I think it was necessary. Some decisions you make alone, because making them together would change them into something else. This was mine to make. The reason I had the documents with me, my lawyer told me to. She's been practicing for 22 years, and she has seen enough situations like this that she told me plainly, always bring the paperwork. I'm glad I listened. I'm telling this story because financial elder abuse is real, and it doesn't always look like what you picture. It doesn't always come from strangers or from people who are obviously malicious. Sometimes it comes from inside the house, wrapped in the language of family and shared assets and helping. Sometimes the person doing it genuinely believes they have a point. That almost makes it harder. My parents deserved a place to be still in, a place that was entirely and completely theirs, with no conditions attached and no one else's name on the door. That's what I built them. My dad is watching the light change on the water right now, in all likelihood. He doesn't have to be anywhere else. That's the whole point.